we're not in person, this is the next best thing. I don't know if we have any other members of the public. Larry, we consider a close friend, so that's terrific to have you on as well. I am very sorry that we didn't get to go to the University of Maine, and I know that John and the team had put an incredible amount of work into planning that, and Cheryl had put a lot of planning into a person meeting, which is transferred to this, but I appreciate everyone making time this morning for this Zoom call meeting. It will be compressed because I think those of us who've done a lot of Zooming know that it's really not fun to be on longer than about 3 or 4 hours. That's it. So we'll talk rather precisely and get as much done as possible. So let's begin with the minutes from the 112th meeting. Boy, it seems like forever ago that we were in Iceland together in October. Oh my golly, yes, that was such a great trip. May I have a motion to approve the minutes? Larry, so moved. Are there any objections or corrections? Without hearing, they are approved. Thank you. So we will move into commissioner reports. I might note, if this is being recorded and the public later watches this, I just want to say that our commissioners, Marie Green from Kotzebue, Dave Benton from Juneau, Jackie Richter-Menge and Larry Mayer, both at University of New Hampshire, and Jackie, I think maybe still with University of Alaska Fairbanks, an affiliation. Happy to have you all on, and also our staff, John Farrell and Kathy Farrow from Washington, D.C., and Cheryl Rosa and Christy Howard here in Anchorage. Thank you for joining us. So our normal pattern here during commissioner reports is to simply go round robin to each of the commissioners to give a brief report, and then we will move on to the staff to do the same thing. And in the interest of time, I would just encourage people to hit a couple of the high points. I know many of you have been involved in lots of events over the last few months that we would love to hear more about, but why don't you pick just a couple that will give us a little bit of insight into the work that you are doing and how it relates to our work here at the Commission. I will start by just saying that even though there have been lots of speeches and lots of conferences and particularly a lot of things lately virtually, I'll just mention that I am serving on the Arctic Science Ministerial 3 Science Advisory Board. As you know, the ministerial is planned between Iceland and Japan to happen in Tokyo in late November. That still has not been officially canceled. There is a likelihood that it will be transferred to May next spring, probably in Iceland, although that has not been announced. The planning continues and the work among the various countries to come back to the organizers with their reports, which will become part of the record of the Arctic Science Ministerial when it is held. And John and many others at NSF have been working very hard to get the US report prepared in a timely fashion. And I might also note that the organizers in Iceland and in Japan had a very interesting process of involving the Arctic Science, the whole community really in the ministerial, by having virtual meetings with the science organizations that have been meeting over the last few months and having breakout sessions at those pre-existing science meetings to talk about any recommendations that people have for the construct of the ministerial and its focus. So that has been proceeding even though we've been all a little bit compromised. I think I'll just stop there. And I will pass the baton to Larry Mayer because he's next on my screen on my Zoom call.
Okay, all right. I have a few items, but I'll be very brief about each one. I think first is that the U.S. Extended Continental Shelf Team has now finished completely the draft of their Arctic submission. So that's a big milestone with respect to moving ahead. It's still not public information yet, but I think if people press, we can start saying where the limits of the continental shelf and the Arctic should be. I think most of you are probably familiar with the fact that there was a presidential memorandum on ocean mapping issued on November 19th, and following from that, just last week, a national strategy for ocean mapping, exploration, and characterization was released. And important to us is that calls for the complete mapping of the US EEZ in shallower waters by 2040 and deeper waters by 2030. And that, of course, involves the Arctic too. It'll be a tremendous challenge in the Arctic, something we should be cognizant of. There's also a separate part of that strategy, which is specific about Alaska, coastal mapping in Alaska, both topographic and bathymetric mapping, and it calls for the complete topographic and shallow water bathymetric mapping around the Alaska coast by 2030, including all of the shoreline and positional control. We are looking now at a Healy cruise in 2021. That'll be a transit of the Northwest Passage, and our lab is hopefully going to be supporting that by collecting bathymetric information, and from there it'll be working in Baffin Bay. And further out in the future, I've been talking with the Norwegians, the Swedes, and hopefully the Healy for a potential 3-ship operation in 2024 involving the Prince Haakon, the Odin, and the Healy, which would be north of Greenland. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Larry, and thanks for your work in that regard, which of course is incredibly important to us here in Alaska, but also to everyone who cares about the Arctic. Moving on to Jackie.
Hi everyone, good to see you. You can see that I haven't got a haircut since I've been stuck in. But anyways, I refuse to let my husband have at it with my hair, so it's just kind of like got antennas everywhere. I have a few things to report as well, and like with Larry, we'll keep it brief. Top of my list is the work that I'm doing as part of the development team for the IARPIC, the new IARPIC 5-year plan, which will cover the years 2022 to 2026. My primary goal there is to see that there's a good connection between the IARPIC plan and the commission goals. So I'm trying to keep that forward in everybody's mind with the potential linkages there, or the appropriate linkages there between the two. I would direct everybody to the IARPIC Collaborations website. They have a page on there that's specific towards the development and the status of it. It outlines the different ways that people can provide input. Right now, the primary thing is for the collection of input. So there's been a Federal Register notice that's been issued. There are plans for a workshop that will be held virtually in September over, I think, a 4-day period. It was originally going to be face-to-face, but they've changed that plan given the issues around the pandemic. There is also a monthly newsletter that's being put out. If you haven't signed up for that newsletter already, I would really urge you to, so that you can keep track of what's going on. The target is for the new report, the new plan to be issued in the winter of 2021. So I think, the rolling up the sleeves part will begin right around, in the fall, winter of next year, once we have all the different input. So that's going along well. A couple other things. I had the privilege of participating in the Wilson Center U.S. Arctic Research Commission and part of the Navy, right, who sponsored the COVID-19 impacts in the Arctic workshop. I thought it was extremely well done. Cheryl and John, I know you had a lot to do with setting it up. I was really impressed with the composition of the panel, the content, Fran, you did a great job. It was just a really impressive conference, particularly when you look at the timeline, because if I remember, wasn't this conceived in like March or something like that? So in 2 months, they had participation of over 1,000 people. That was really super impressive. I also wanted to say that recently I was honored to take on the position on the advisory council for the Marine Science and Ocean Engineering School, UNH. One of my taskers, if you will be to link the school with some federal agencies, you know, addressing their needs, and also bringing in the Arctic group, that's the nascent Arctic group that's developing at UNH into that area. Two more things on SciSex. They did collect some data in conjunction with the ISEX 2020 program. Those data are currently being declassified, and I need to talk with John about a strategy because we're long overdue for a meeting between the Science Advisory Committee and the Interagency Committee, frankly, to determine what the interest is with regard to sustaining SciSex. I think the science community is interested. I'm not so sure about the agencies. It's been hard to engage with the Navy at the ONR level on this. And finally, one little last piece of cool science news. I just was alerted to the fact that ISAT-2 and Cryosat-2 are going to merge their orbits, which is really a fascinating thing that's going to happen and really neat because the two satellites complement one another. The Cryosat-2 actually has a altimeter on it that can penetrate the ice cover, so it's looking at what the, or snow cover, excuse me, so it's looking at what the surface of the sea ice is, while ISAT-2 is actually looking at the snow cover. So the two of them traveling together can get, you know, what the snow surface is and the ice surface, and get a lot more information about the snow cover and more accurate readings of what ice thickness is from space. So it's just a really neat step to see moving forward. That's it.
Thank you, Jackie, and thanks particularly for your work on IARPC and linking the Arctic Research Commission work with the IARPC work. Thank you. Marie Green, if you can hear me, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's morning here for me, so good morning. Could you hear me?
We can hear you fine, Marie, thanks.
I'm having trouble. Yeah, I'm having trouble connecting, so I don't know if you could hear me. I could hear everyone.
We can hear you fine, Marie.
Oh, okay, very good, thank you. Yeah, good morning, everyone, and I hope everyone is doing well, considering what we've all been going through. Just a real quick report. I did what Jackie just said about the May 19th and 20th COVID-19 impacts in the Arctic. I was really excited when I saw read the announcement, and so I got to join virtually and was really impressed with how well it was put together. But more importantly, the guests, the panelists, the speakers, it was really focused on the Arctic, and just appreciated including panelists from, for example, from Manila Association and others, even Utkavik and others that joined. Nicely put together, and I thought you all did really well, Jackie, Fran, and thank you, John and Cheryl, for putting that together, all your behind the scenes hard work. After the 2 days of this conference, I just wanted to express that I hope in the future there'll be something similar to this, so that once, you know, we're kind of over the peak of, you know, the cases, the pandemic, and the cases, all the, you know, positive results that we've been getting and learning as we go along. I just really want to commend our local leadership We have a Northwest Arctic leadership team in our region, and from the beginning, I think I want to say early March, maybe end of February, the leadership got together. They formed a task force and representatives from each of the villages, preparing ourselves for the pandemic. And forces were formed. And I think this really has paid off, all this upfront communication and what we need to be doing to prepare ourselves when we get hit with the pandemic. So I thought this was the 19th and 20th COVID-19 impacts in the Arctic meeting was really perfect timing. So I want to say thank you for all those efforts. Pretty much hunkered down here in Kotzebue, but during that time, also having a lot of time reading, trying to learn more about what other regions are doing with regards to research in the Arctic. And the one that I really landed on was the efforts of Walrus. Really impressed with how they've come together, not only come together to meet, but communicating what they feel they need to have in place for research. Really wanting to strengthen the collaboration and just really appreciate their focus. So I'm right now, as of 2 days ago, I've been trying to learn more about what Maniluk is doing, what others are doing in the region, the Kotzebue IRA, with regards to research. I know there's changes now because of the pandemic and how research is being conducted, but I think more than anything, this is perfect timing to allow us to use our local resources, truly partnering up to continue research in any way that we can. But that's the extent of it, Fran.
Thank you, Marie. It would be wonderful if you would share with all of us what you learn as you continue to check in with local entities in the region that are doing research like Kawarak and Maniluk and others. So as you do that bit of reading and working, please think about sharing that with all of us. That would really be helpful. Okay, moving on to Dave Benton.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, all right. By the way, my dog's in the background, so you may hear her too. Yeah, I'll keep it fairly brief, Fran. First off, although I can't see you all, it's good to hear you. And hope everybody's safe and well. Since the meeting in Iceland, probably the most significant thing has been progress made on the Joint Program of Scientific Research and Monitoring for the Central Arctic Ocean under the agreement that we secured. The parties to that agreement formed a scientific committee, agreed to form a scientific committee, as we talked about last fall. They had a meeting in February, sponsored by the European Union in Italy, just before Italy shut down. They got in and they got out safely. And at that meeting, first meeting of the science committee, they developed some operating procedures and for the near term for that committee, which will, in order to actually come into force, they have to go to the parties and be adopted by the parties. But it's not a bad package. Marie, one of the things that was a topic of some debate, and I don't think it's quite resolved yet, is how to incorporate local and indigenous knowledge into that scientific program and the role that indigenous organizations will have. Where that group landed, and I was not at that meeting, by the way, just FYI, but where that group landed was that any party that wants to bring indigenous participants as part of their delegation to the science committee can do so. And they also want to follow up on work that has been done mostly over in Canada in terms of trying to come up with a workable model. for how indigenous knowledge and Western science can be merged and incorporated, very much along the lines of the co-production of knowledge discussions that have been going on in the U.S. and elsewhere I think it's under the ICC rubric. But anyway, it's an ongoing discussion, but there's no question that indigenous participants will have a seat at the table and play a really big role. So that was pretty exciting. I was sort of hoping that what would happen is that they would agree that at least some representation from indigenous organizations such as ICC would be provided for on a standalone basis. In other words, they would not have to be part of a national delegation. They would be there on their own in a recognition of the significance of the contribution they could make. That ran into some headwinds, I guess, from primarily, I think, our European friends. So that's still something that'll need to be worked on. But anyway, it's been reasonable amount of progress made there. The only other thing I wanted to mention is a very interesting thing. John sent around a while ago. I think it came out of John, but it was a report out of Russia about some of the projects that they wanted to pursue at the Arctic Council level, and one of those projects was hydrogen. Was to look at demonstration projects involving the production and use of hydrogen as a cleaner fuel, and do that in the Arctic, some kind of test project. It was interesting to me because I've been in discussions with some folks about hydrogen and its potential use in shipping in the Arctic, and the idea of developing clean hydrogen and doing that like either through geothermal or potentially wind farms. So it's something that is sort of intriguing, and I'd like to maybe pick that up on when we talk about the goals report just a little bit. And that's really it on my end. We've been waiting on getting the international agreement fully ratified. Every party except for China has completed the ratification process. We're waiting on China to see what they do. And other than that, it's been a little quiet. But that's it, Fran. I'm done.
Thank you, Dave, for the report. And like you, when I saw the list of Russian projects being tentatively considered for Arctic Council chairmanship agenda, I was intrigued by the hydrogen idea as well. I noted that they were proposing to do that in partnership with Norway. So I gather that there's some concept already that's been at least discussed and perhaps is evolving, but we will stay tuned. All right, thank you all very much. Before I go to staff reports, let me just check in. Larry Hinsman is on the call, and Larry has recently taken a position in DC, and I wonder if you want to take just a moment to tell us about that. Welcome.
Sure. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's
fine. Can you
fine.
hear me? Oh, okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks, everybody. Yeah, I know everybody who's spoken, and I'm delighted to be allowed to listen into your call. And you are correct. I've been a good friend of the Arctic Research Commission for many, many years. I do hope that I can use this position to help advance the goals of the commission. I think I've always greatly valued the goals report, and I hope that we can, and I do appreciate Jackie's efforts to integrate the goals reports into the Arctic Research Plan. I think that's really important, and I think that it'll be good for the nation and good for the research community. Also, And thanks, Jackie, for promoting the newsletter and encouraging people to provide some input into that. I think that's really important, and we're really scrambling to do that right now. We've got a wonderful team working on this, and I think that that this Arctic Research Plan is going to be very strong. I'm really very optimistic. Further, with respect to my role in OSTP, the Office of Science Technology Policy, so I'm very excited about the level of interest in polar regions right now. And I think that let's see, I can't without making a statement. I think that this is going to be a good time for polar regions. And so I do appreciate your input, and I just want you to know that I am an asset to to your community, to your efforts. And so if there's assistance or efforts that I should invest in, please let me know and I'll do the best that I can. So thank you for all that. Thanks, Fran.
Thank you very much for taking on the assignment, and we wish you well there, and we'll definitely consider you a partner in our work. Thank you. So John and Cheryl, you have done some excellent work over the last few months, and your staff reports make that quite clear that you're involved in a lot of things that really matter. And we thank you for all the extra work that you put in that we don't even know about. I'd just like to turn to both of you right now for a few of the highlights that you want to share, and perhaps even tease up for some discussion with commissioners. So I don't know which one of you wants to go first.
Fran, thank you for that. Before we get started, since we're a little bit ahead of schedule, would it be okay if we asked a couple of questions on some of the commissioner reports?
Sure, of course, that's fine.
Okay. Question for Larry I had. You said the team finished the draft of the Arctic submission. It's not yet public. Is there a timeline for this? I know we talk about this at every meeting. Is there a revised timeline for when the U.S. might take some kind of public action on this?
Yeah, I think they're still aiming for 2021 as the timeline for making the submission public.
Okay, and there won't be any more foreshadowing by some of legal counsel in State Department in publications, say, before that occurs, or?
I just don't know.
Okay.
I mean, it's so sensitive in many ways, you know, beyond just internally. It's really the international issue of how the U.S. is going to handle a submission that to a treaty that it's not party to. And so there's a lot of delicate.
Okay. Another question about that coastal mapping. And I never got a sense of why the Alaska region was specifically called out and given such attention. I mean, it's certainly warranted, but do you know a little of the backstory on how that happened?
The answer is no. It was a surprise because it hadn't come up at all during the White House summit. It wasn't broken out as a particular separate topic at the White House summit. And it basically, something happened between the White House summit and a few weeks later when the presidential memorandum came out. And I don't know what, as you say, it's certainly warranted and needed. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But in my usual cynicism, I assume there was some political pressure put on to call out Alaska specifically, and again, not unwarranted.
Did you get any sense, and I haven't myself, from talking with people like Ashley Chappell and others at NOAA, whether there is any plans for additional resourcing to help speed up this, or is it just, you know, we have 100 years worth of mapping ahead of us?
Yeah, I think there's hope that there will be, and I think kind of the intelligence I've gotten about future budget requests are going to demonstrate that hope. Whether it comes to fruition or not is another story. But I think the recognition is that it can't be done in the time frame proposed. And the Alaska mapping also was a 2030 without additional resources. That's quite a bit. again, whether it comes to fruition or not is a different story.
Do you see anybody picking up on some of the technology you've been trying to advance for autonomous mapping of the really shallow waters?
Yeah, no, it's already happening. Sail drones are heading up there this summer to start mapping, and that's a very viable technique. I'm hoping that maybe with the 2021 plan for the Healy, we might be able to actually have an autonomous vessel program too, because it's a way for us to get the vessel there. That the Healy's going to leave Dutch Harbor, but have to come around the North Slope to get through the Northwest Passage. So we may have an opportunity there too. So I think yes, there is lots of focus on technology.
Do you think some of the use of the ISAT-2 satellite for the really shallow water would be a high enough quality to qualify for mapping, or is that still too off?
It's a very hot topic in our community now. We've got a group looking into it. Oregon State is looking into it. And so it's actually very exciting that ISAT-2 has some real potential for bathymetry in shallow water and some advantages over standard satellite-derived bathymetric mapping approaches.
Yeah, that would be good in the Northwest Passage.
Yep.
And then I'm sorry to keep going on this, but do you think there will be any concerns expressed by the Canadians regarding a bathymetric collection of data by Healy on a transit, particularly?
Yeah, so I've tried to preempt that. I'm not sure as soon as I heard about it, I contacted CHS asking them for some base maps and explaining what they're doing. And they right away came back and said, well, you have to ask permission to do this. And I said, of course, but I've already invited CHS participation if we go. We don't know that we'll be doing this, but if we're selected, part of my proposal says there will be CHS participation, and they're already trying to, the whole crux of our proposal to do this is to ensure that the vessel goes in places that haven't been mapped before, which is not that hard to do, but it is also pretty easy just to follow the path you went last time and collect data in the exact same spot. And just by offsetting a few kilometers, you can collect totally new data. And now the Canadians have some really high priority areas they want mapped. And so we're already trying to feed that to the Coast Guard and get that worked into the plan.
Okay, I've been monopolizing the questions. Does anyone else have some?
You just call me up anytime.
Does anyone else have any questions about anything that any of the commissioners have said before we move to staff reports?
All right, well, I have another question then. This is for—
Okay, last one, John. And
this is for Marie. Marie, thank you for your very kind words about the COVID-19 conference that we put on in May. You mentioned something about wanting to see this happen again. Do you have any further thoughts on who might be a good group or organization to do that this time? Do you think it might make sense for Alaska-based entities to put on a successor meeting on this? I'm just curious if you have any ideas.
Yeah, thank you, John. Actually, that's a real good question. Last night when I was trying to go to sleep, that's exactly what I was thinking about. Looking at AFN last convention, they passed a couple of resolutions with regards to climate change, and but after this conference, on the focus on COVID, I think it would be worth spending some time to have a brainstorm session, and I could reach out to other leadership and ask them with regards to what, following with what you guys all put together for the May virtual meeting conference with regards to COVID. I can ask that question because I think there's lessons learned. We can become more educated on the pandemic. We're now hearing at the national, even globally, and at the national level, how the
Marie, we lost your audio there for a second. Marie, can you hear us? She's still unmuted. I wonder if she's lost her audio.
You know, Cheryl, it might make more sense for Marie to phone in
Can
rather
you hear
than try to
me?
use her computer.
Oh, yep, we can hear you now. Marie, if that continues to happen, you may want to just call in to one of those dial by your location numbers and not even try to do the video Zoom
Okay,
part.
maybe I'll do that. Okay, maybe I'll do that then, because there's a lot of echoing now.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. We'll watch for you to log back on.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I guess we'll just proceed then, okay, Fran?
Yeah, I would just say that this is a reminder that not all places in the Arctic have the kind of connectivity that would be good to have in the 21st century. And for a lot of places, not just in Alaska, but other places, it still is a struggle in a lot of ways. So not surprising that the Arctic Council and other entities continue to kind of elevate the topic of connectivity and telecommunications and Wi-Fi access as part of the agenda. And of course, there are lots of different solutions to that problem, but at any rate, Marie, are you back on yet?
No, I don't see her number on the list yet. I'll let you know.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions or comments from any of the commissioner reports?
I
If
have
not,
one.
okay, Cheryl, go ahead.
Sorry, this is a question for Jackie. I'm moving my pictures over so I can see her. Jackie, do you have an update on what's going on with the INE and the grant that?
Structure.
Well, INE structure and also what that might mean for the grant through the Corps that was being offered for advancing the Arctic, the Atlas for infrastructure and environmental atlas.
Actually, I think John can answer that better. I think in your report, John, you had some information embedded on that, right? With regard to the fact that the award's been made. I'm not sure they've started work. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I just didn't know if you had anything further. Okay.
Yeah, no, I just have what I put in the report, but you know, a quick call to Scott Rupp would give you the very latest, Cheryl.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Thanks.
I think then at this point, Fran, like to move along, Cheryl, I'd offer you the opportunity to go first if you like, or if you'd like me to go, however.
Why don't you go first? I need to watch for Marie. So I'm kind of
Okay.
trying to do two things at once. Hopefully she'll call in and I'll be able to let her in and then I'll be undivided.
Okay, thanks. And thanks. It's nice to see you all, and I'm glad Larry could join us too. We're very pleased that Larry is there, finally filling that position that was left vacant by Martin Jeffries over 2 years ago. So it's very important that Larry's here. We can't think of a more qualified person to fill that slot. So we're just tickled, we'll just tickle pink that he's in this position, and we're going to do everything we can to support him. We've already had some good conversations with Larry as he takes his great expertise and now sort of rounds that out with experience in the machinations of DC and the federal government. But he's a quick study, and I'm sure it will go very well. So my staff report you have in writing. I'll just pick a couple of highlights. So unfortunately, this is not being seen live by a group other than those of us on it, but it is being recorded, and it will be posted to YouTube for those who want to watch it after the fact. So you consider it semi-live. So looking at a few highlights in the staff report, the major efforts that we've been working on since our last meeting in Reykjavik include largely doing a lot of thinking, reading, condensing ideas down for the goals report, which we presented to you in the summary today for our discussion. We did a lot of planning for the 113th that was going to be in Maine, and it really looked like an excellent meeting. I was very excited about it, and I hope that we can kind of dust that off in the future and indeed return there. They were very eager. There's a lot of interest in New England states in the Arctic region, which I think is a fascinating development over the last 5 years or so. And I think Orono is a good example of that. There's quite a lot of expertise if you start scratching the surface a little bit. And I thought we had an excellent agenda. So I hope we can dust that off and revisit there. I'm also sorry to say that we will have to postpone further the meeting that we were planning to have at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Nunavut in Canada in September. That would have been an excellent opportunity to get together with our colleagues in Canada, Polar Knowledge Canada, sort of our sister organization, if you will, and to see an amazing high Arctic research station as it continues to develop. Maybe next year in 2021 if things work out. There was nice mention about the COVID-19 impacts in the Arctic Virtual Conference. You know, this is one of the beautiful things about being at the commission is that we do have latitude, we do have opportunity to be flexible and to pursue things that we hadn't even thought about. So it's not in any strategic plan. It's just complete opportunistic when something like this came up, where the idea for this came from a colleague at the Naval War College who contacted me and said, hey, John, you've got a big Rolodex of Arctic people. You know this, you know that, let's get something going. And talked to Fran said, go for it. And Cheryl jumped in and Jackie, and we brought in the Wilson Center and we were off and running. We got 46 panelists from all over the world. We had 10 panels. I think it was structured right. I think the timing was about right. Our emphasis on not having PowerPoints, instead emphasizing conversation, I think helped make it more dynamic and compelling to the audience. So there were little glitches here and there, and we did learn a lot about how to do this. And Marie, well, if Marie comes back or sees this, I'd be happy to sit and talk, I'm sure Cheryl and any of us would, with others who may be interested in picking up where we left off and hosting a successor meeting of some kind. I think some of the things we did learn would be helpful to pass on.
So John, just so you know, Marie is back on the call.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. You know, it's very interesting, as we got going on this and people found out about it, we started having calls from very senior people saying, oh, can we join your meeting? We heard about it. So you know, we ended up having Tim Gallaudet from NOAA, we had the governor of Alaska, and so, but it was a great mix of people from Hong Kong all the way over to Sweden and everywhere in between, from the high Arctic down to tropical regions. So I thought it went very well, and I'm greatly appreciative that the commission enables us to spend time and effort to do such opportunities like that when we can squeeze them in. And it was great. There's in my report, there's a nice news story on it, and I'll leave it at that. I wanted to mention, as it was already raised, the topic of the Arctic infrastructure. I think this is a real success story for the commission since our last goals report, that if you really want to kind of see where our recommendations lead to tangible results, I think this is one area where we should be very proud of, thanks to the efforts of many on the commission. I mean, Fran did a lot of legwork with engineering firms. Jackie's done a lot over the years too. Cheryl has done a lot too. So it was very helpful for us, so that as we compiled those recommendations and then moved out with them, it's one thing to publish our goals report. It's another thing to put it under our arm and go knocking on doors and showing it to people and saying, here's how you connect, here's how you connect, and convincing them. And, you know, I find people are pretty amenable to that. They just either forgot what we had said, or it wasn't fresh in their mind, or they need to be reminded. So I went knocking at the door along with a couple of others to DOD, and they had money for Arctic infrastructure. And so as is in the report, they recently awarded $4 million to 2 projects, one in an Arctic environmental engineering design, data and design support system that'll be done at the University of Fairbanks and led by Scott Rupp. And it's a really great project where you're basically combining environmental data that we spend a lot of time talking about how important it is with the practical applications for downscaling it to design and planning for practical applications. And so it'd be very interesting to see how the system comes along over the next year or two. And the second award was to the Corel Cold Regions Lab, to Kevin Biela. And it was really interesting. The military has a unified codes for constructing things, and they hadn't updated the one for the cold regions since the 1950s. And Kevin Biela said, well, gosh, we can't even get money for redoing the Unified Facilities Code. And so this provided that opportunity. And this is like the baseline. How do we construct things, period, in cold regions, whether Arctic, Antarctic, high latitude or high elevation where it's cold. And so this will be used across the board to reset the standards for buildings in Thule, buildings in Northern Alaska, anywhere you go. And other countries will use this code as well. So it seems almost stunning to me that there wasn't an opportunity to get the money from another place within DoD to do this, even though apparently attempts had been made. So it was very nice that this program manager saw the utility of this and awarded funds to update all of those codes. It sounds a bit mundane, but it's really fundamental information. So I'm very pleased that the commission has been keen on those, and there's descriptions in my report about how those are coming. I'll really kind of just skim over the administrative issues because it's all in the report, but basically good news. We just got word that our lease in DC will be in the same place for another 10 years. I still don't have the price on that lease, but our lease in Anchorage has been renewed and actually at a lower price than our previous lease, given the real estate market in Anchorage. Our budget was finally approved in March for 2020. And we did okay, despite some challenges in some of the fiscal situations. So I think OMB recognizes that we've been pretty good with our flat budget for a while, and this time stopped cutting us. And that's been great. And we have a decent budget submitted for 2021, but that remains, that Congress is working on that one. So budget-wise, we're okay. Lease-wise, with our facilities, our office space, should we ever return to them? Cheryl's in her office, but we're not in ours. That will be well. And we're doing a good job being compliant with all the kinds of policies that we need to create. The EEOC found us, and Kathy, who's online, and I spent a lot of time making sure we have an equal employment opportunity program for our small commission. So we are now fully compliant with that. And that's a lot for an agency with just 3 civil servants, but we have a fully compliant program now. And I will leave it at that unless there are any questions.
All right, let me first take a few questions and then get back to Marie because we have her back online. Any questions for John? Okay, then Marie, if you could continue where we perhaps left off, and we pretty much lost you as soon as you started talking.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl, for all the information to be able to call in. Yeah, John, just to continue on with your question real quickly, I think it would be critical to build on the May 19th, 20th virtual conference. And the reason why I say that, because, you know, we all know this is global, and as we go through these experiences with the pandemic, there's a lot of lessons learned. And I think this building on the first virtual conference with a focus on COVID-19 in the Arctic would really be worth the time. But also what came to my mind was, you know, the research, the interest from researchers on wanting to do research on the pandemic. I know I received one email with regards to that probably about 3 weeks ago. So that's what made me start thinking about how we could build on this virtual conference. And John, as you mentioned, I'm willing to have more discussion about that, but thank you, Fran. That's basically what I shared.
Yeah, okay, we will follow up, Marie, because I do sense that even though people have what's called COVID fatigue, it's not going anywhere. And if you look at the numbers globally, it is strong as ever, and particularly in the Americas. So I think the extent to which the continuing lessons learned and the opportunity for all of us, regardless of where we are, to really better understand the successes that some regions have had and frankly, the failures of others might help us as we learn to live with something that isn't going away anytime soon. So we will follow up. With that, Cheryl, let me pass it to you.
Great, thank you, Fran. So I've just pulled out a few parts of my report that I wanted to give a little bit more detail on. And I'm going to go sequentially from the most recent, and then I'm going to kind of go backwards. And some of this, it seems like it happened such a long time ago because it's been a while since we've been able to meet officially. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and show you all. Hopefully you can see my screen now. This is a advertisement for a workshop that we held last week, and this is associated with our Arctic Renewable Energy Working Group. We have been working with ACEP, the Alaska Center for Energy and Power at UAF, and we have, well, initially we were going to have a series of in-person workshops, which is now quickly turned to a bunch of virtual workshops, and the first of these is represented here. We had a workshop, a two-day workshop or symposium last week on electric vehicles. And this covered everything from grid impacts to policy issues to use of electric vehicles in extreme environments. And it was very interesting. We had folks on from Minnesota, Vermont, and Norway talking about how they've been able to get kind of electric vehicles and electric buses for public infrastructure and been able to make them work in cold environments, both at the policy level and at just kind of the physical level, being able to get things to actually mechanically work when it's really cold, and what the impacts of really cold temperatures are on electric vehicles. USARC is taking the lead on the report for this, working closely with ACEP, and we had a great crew of folks that were on the steering committee for this. We were able to get some excellent speakers, and it's one of the, you know, if you're going to try to look at the silver lining of COVID and having to do things online, I was not sold on these virtual workshops. I was not really thinking that they were going to be very effective, but one, we've been able to get relatively last minute even some really excellent speakers to join in these workshops that we might not have been able to get if we had to fly them here to join in. And we have also gotten, we had over almost 200 participants, and we had even had somebody from Nairobi call in for this, which was kind of interesting. So we're able to reach a much extended outreach in terms of viewership for these workshops. So it was everything that we've heard. We heard that people were really happy with how it went, and we did have some evaluations after each of the Zoom sessions. People were asked to submit their thoughts on kind of how it went and how it could have been improved and what they liked, what they didn't like. So we have some really good feedback as well. So we're still working on what the next workshop will be, and that will probably be in September. We're hoping, I guess what was discussed yesterday, it will most likely be solar plus battery, and looking at the research related to both of these things. And I will keep you all up to date on how that proceeds. But that's what I'm thinking is going to happen there. Just as a little bit more background with the RWIG, the Renewable Energy Working Group, we have shifted from monthly meetings to quarterly meetings / symposia. And this is kind of filling those spots. We had to kind of change with the times in terms of what was fulfilling the needs of the folks that are actually on the working group. And they were very interested in having presentations made. The monthly meetings seemed like they were a bit much, and we were having really variable attendance. So this is a way to kind of, one, partner with others, and two, kind of engage and do subject matter that is more engaging to our WIG group. So anyways, this was our first attempt, and we were real happy with how that went. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to move on quickly, and I can take questions at the end. I did want to talk a little bit about our water and sanitation working group, and this ties in nicely, I think, to what Marie and John were just presenting. So we have not had a specific COVID-19 focus. However, right now we are doing two things. We're wrapping up the report from the capacity exchange meeting in January, and we're in the early planning stages of trying to figure out what we want to do for the Alaska Public Health Association's meeting. We have our January meeting every year, and this is right around the time we decide what it is we want to do, because generally they like to know our subject matter in September. We don't know if the Alpha meeting will happen in person. I kind of think it probably won't. So this may, again, be a virtual meeting. However, some of you may have seen either from Alaska, there was just a recent news report from Homer that the DEC is doing monitoring of wastewater for COVID-19. And they actually pulled samples and had information prior that would predicted what was going to happen in Homer and Anchor Point in terms of caseload. So it's pretty fascinating stuff that they're doing. It's being done in other places in the United States. And I suspect that this may be where we go with our Alpha subject matter, because it really brings together the water and sanitation part of things that we do and the public health part of things that we do. And there was also a lot of interest on the COVID-19 symposium in that subject matter as well. So kind of gross, but at the same time, kind of fascinating. So hopefully we can engage people in talking about sewer. I will stop there in terms of our water and sanitation group, with the exception of saying that we have engaged further with the state. We've invited Sarah Yoder to the group to get a more health input from the state of Alaska. And she's been great. She's been coming to all the meetings and has been very, very helpful. And let's see. One more thing that I did want to share with you prior, I'm going to share my screen again. Back before the holidays, hold on one sec, I attended a, hang on, there we go. You guys all have to bear with me for a sec. And there we go. So hopefully you're looking at my slides now. I attended a meeting that the National Academy of Science put on along in partnership with a Chicago native who is a good friend of mine, Edward Zador. He is a PhD candidate at UAF. And this workshop the goals of this was to bring together an interdisciplinary international group of researchers and public health officials to talk about what knowledge gaps remain regarding existing and possible future risk of harmful microbial agents that potentially could be coming from thawing permafrost or just in the ice, in the polar climates in general. And to also provide a helpful state of the science overview and information to help frame new actions in advanced research, surveillance, and response capacity. Those are kind of the stated objectives. And I just wanted to show you guys a couple of slides that I think would be of interest. Edward provided some amazing pictures and an amazing kind of account of how marine mammals, how subsistence users have interaction with what they eat, essentially. And he was really the voice for a lot of subsistence consumers. And I think that he opened the eyes and of many people that were there that probably didn't quite understand fully the interaction between people and their food. And it was a really interesting commentary in terms of the different ways of processing and the different ways that people are adapting. He was obviously speaking specifically about Chukotka, but there was a lot of discussion just in general. And one of the things that came out of this that I thought was very helpful for the group and ended up being kind of a really strong direction the group took was that people in villages and outlying areas of the Arctic, they are the first line of observation and surveillance. And we need to better engage with them on how to really make the capabilities of getting the information they're getting from the environment to the researchers. And the report is not out yet, but I suspect that that is going to be kind of the main thrust of what is recommended. And I was really pleased. I think that that probably wouldn't have happened if Edward, who the commission supported attending, I think that he was instrumental in kind of pushing that and the importance of that. So I was really pleased with how that went. It was a fascinating and sometimes scary workshop. But when the report does come out, I'm happy to share it with everybody. I'm sure it will be very interesting. And myself and Edward are also following up on several connections we made at that meeting. And I will leave it there for questions. As John kind of went over some of the administrative things, we're under control here at the office, and Christy Hobbert, who is our now, I guess, not so new resource coordinator, she's on the call, has been working out great. I'm pleased and has been extremely helpful and instrumental in getting and keeping our working groups working and moving forward. So I'm always happy for assistance. And yeah, I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl, and very glad that you were able to attend and participate, and that Edward added so much value. I'm assuming that part of what ANTHC and the LEO network is trying to do is the kind of information flow from the regions, from subsistence users and observers in the villages. Was there discussion about how to amplify that or build on what already exists?
Yes, so Mike Brubaker was actually there in person, and he did a presentation on LEO and CLEO, which is the circumpolar LEO. I think that part of the issue there is that these observations through LEO are kind of one-offs. There's not a systematic approach. And so there's observational value, absolutely. And it often is the kind of thing that will kind of get people's attention and maybe allow people to zoom in areas where, oh, we're hearing reports from this region that these are being seen, or this is happening. And certainly that is something that is of value. I think that there was a lot of discussion about trying to make observations such as that more systematic, something more along the lines of, you remember when we saw the presentations from the folks out on St. Paul and some of what they're doing with the Bering Sea work. This is kind of more along the lines of what was being discussed and how we might be able to create a network that would be not just for Alaska, because of course the audience was international, but how we could have these representatives watching for very specific things and trying to be more systematic about the way things are collected across the Arctic. And part of what we had taken on as kind of a future effort is trying to both list and connect the many different groups that exist that are collecting that kind of data that we found out, unfortunately, at this meeting aren't necessarily talking to each other, which was, yeah, so we will be working on that. The commission will be hopefully trying to kind of amass some of that information and trying to figure out how to connect the dots on those ones as part of this workshop.
Great, thanks. Like many things, it's the networking that is so important to really add value of bringing the various streams of information together in a useful way. And unfortunately, that's the kind of thing that requires structure, which requires agreement, which requires some funding, but I'm glad there are discussions about it because it's important. Other questions for Cheryl or for John? And I might ask Larry Hinsman as well, please feel free to jump in if you have questions about anything that you have heard. We'd be happy to have your participation as well. If no one else, I see John raising his hand.
Yeah, I have a question for Cheryl. I mean, given the emphasis on food security that we're hearing as even a potential driver for the IARPC 5-year plan, you know, I think the idea of zoonosis and hunters and gatherers on the front line being connected to the researchers sounds like a fantastic topic related to food security. So I might ask, given that we already have a very solid existing structure for this with the co-management for all the marine mammal organizations, why, and there's biosampling, and at one point I remember you telling me about a bioarchiving and the need to have a bioarchive of materials. Why shouldn't we use our existing mechanisms, or what are we doing wrong by not using these existing mechanisms?
So a really good example of that, and maybe with COVID this will change, but I mean, you recall for 4 years we tried to get money for the AMTAP program to get it reinvigorated, and that was $250,000. We're not talking millions of dollars even. And for those who don't know, the AMTAP stands for the Alaska Marine Mammal Tissue Archival Project. So it wasn't specific to the Arctic, but it was working with folks in the co-management groups that were collecting marine mammals, and they were taking parts and pieces for things like toxicology and to store at NIST for future use, even if there wasn't a immediate use for them. And those are the kind of things that can be wonderful to go back to see if diseases were present or antibodies were present back when you didn't even know something existed. But it's been really difficult because nobody has wanted, you would think that that would be very high on NOAA's list, or prior to this, it had been funded through MMS, which was BOEM before BOEM was BOEM. And nobody wanted to put up the money. And I think what we really need is a call or some voices from rural Alaska that there's concern and that they want to see things like that funded. And it was just never, we were never really able to get that. And, but maybe now there will be more concern, and maybe there'll be more, it'll be more likely to get funded. It just seems like, you know, NOAA and to some extent Fish and Wildlife Service, because they have polar bears, walrus, and sea otters, they have kind of the link in terms of the sampling and the permitting for something like that. And it's budgets have been tight, and that has not been a priority for them. So it's a struggle. I think though that this COVID situation may kind of drive home the importance of the human environment wildlife interface, and that's the whole concept of One Health. So we'll see. But yes, no, I agree. We have existing, I mean, they don't exist outside of the US, but there are kind of analogous groups that can do things like that. So it would be great. Why reinvent the wheel? But easier said than done, unfortunately. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments on anything that we have discussed before we take our break? Okay, well, thank you all very much for your participation so far. We're going to take